Talking with Joe McGuire, who not only congratulations on re-election.
Thank you very much.
Who was in the House of Representatives for the state of Wyoming. Hangar One in Casper, Wyoming was the first hangar built out of all of them, and we were talking about how that was built a little while ago. All by hand, on scaffolding, no electric tools way back then.
It's a compelling story. You know, the Chamber of Commerce, Casper Chamber of Commerce, went out to Washington, D.C., and the question was, how can we be part of the war program? And at that point, they were building 12 training bases within the continental U.S., and they wanted to build them in the interior of the U.S. because at that time, they were afraid of the coastal areas being bombarded by either the Japanese or the Germans. So they picked areas inside the continental or inside the country, and from the time that they started building the Casper Army Air Base to the time they finished and were accepting crews was 6 months. And yes, like you say, that was in the days before cherry pickers and big cranes and everything. So when you take a look at the interior and look up at the ceiling of that hangar, it's amazing to think that that was all done by hand by people carrying those timbers up, drilling those holes by hand, bolting them by hand on scaffolding, completing the roof. And I mean, it's, as you say, it is a tall hangar. So it was an amazing amount of work, and just, you know, a real tribute to those people.
Do you know about how long it took them to build the hangar?
I don't. The records only talk about the construction period of the whole air base, but that included over 300 buildings around the base, plus 4 miles of runway, plus all the ramp, plus a complete sewer system, a complete power system, telephones, and a rail spur for a railroad. So they built a lot.
2 runways.
Yeah, there were 4 runways back in the day.
And this area, I understand that they picked not just because centrally located in the country, but we had mountains around the area, and some of these guys would have to do mountain flying, so it'd be the perfect place to train them.
Yeah, this was turned into an advanced training base because, just like you said, between the poor weather and the wind and the wide open spaces, and the fact that when they were training at night, it was dark in Wyoming back in those days. You get over the Shirley Basin in those areas, there weren't any lights. So they wanted those guys to have the most difficult conditions possible, and I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody that Wyoming provided that in spades.
And many of the pilots that came out to train during that time were young men. We're talking 19.
Oh, you know, my dad was 17 when he volunteered, and you know, he'd never even heard of Japan, and you know, just kids. And to put them in charge of these huge, very powerful airplanes with crude, rudimentary instruments and send them out at night on training missions, you know, they would take off from here, fly all the way to LA, do a practice bomb run on LA or San Francisco, and fly all the way back at night. And that was before GPS or anything else. That was all dead reckoning.
I was with my instructor last week flying out here in the practice area. He pointed out to me, you can still see one of the targets out here, the circles out there. I wonder if you went out there, could you still find bits and pieces? I would assume so.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I had a whole pile of old practice bombs that I had gone and picked up. And then over here where they did the sighting in, the bore sighting and the work on the machine guns, I had buckets and buckets of 50 cal casings. And one day my dad took them all down and got them recycled. I was just crushed. But anyway, when you're a parent, sometimes you don't want your kids' junk around. And he being a veteran, that to him was just, you know, it was scrap metal.
Well, now that brings us to the part of you being a kid in Hangar One, because Hangar One is, we could say, pretty much where you grew up. Your dad was working there. How old when you first got into Hangar One?
I was, you know, he was there before I was born, so I literally grew up in Hangar One.
Yeah. So what did you do to keep yourself from getting bored?
I had the Sears mini bike, which I, you know, saved and bought, and back in those days, people had a little better sense of humor. They didn't really care as long as you weren't on the active runway. So I terrorized this place on my Sears mini bike and went out to the old gunnery range, and there's the old dump, and you know, went and visited people. And then as soon as I was able to work, I was working for people, working the line. I was driving a fuel truck for the FBO before I had a driver's license.
Well, I guess you're old enough now that you can't get in trouble for it. Did you ever climb up into the rafters or
Oh,
other
yeah.
places that you weren't supposed to be?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What kind of airplanes did you see come in and out while you were growing up there?
When I was growing up, it was the tail end of the Vietnam War. And so one of the gentlemen, Floyd Hawley, who was running the FBO down at this end of the field, he was a F4 driver. And so, yeah, we had F4s and T-33s coming in. And, those guys were friends, and they would, part of the training regimen at that time was doing cross countries and things. So, yeah, you never know what would show up.
Did you get a chance to meet Mr. Good when he first took over the hangar?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I knew Jim from long before. I owe a lot to Jim. He helped me pick up time. He used to fly the pipeline, and he would allow me to go and fly the pipeline, and eventually I had to the point where I could fly it for him if he was unavailable.
Well, and he had, of course, his famous plane that he flew in Reno. Did you ever get a chance to get behind the stick of that?
I did, actually. It was owned, Don Davis purchased it when he had a company called Tired Iron here. And so I got to fly it a little bit when Don had it, and then he sold it to Jim Good, and it's still here on the airport. A gentleman by the name of Virgil just purchased it, and so we are so fortunate to still have it here on the airport.
So I guess you were here when the MiGs arrived.
I was.
Yeah, okay. So you got to see them put the wings back on?
Yeah, they came in shipping containers, and actually Don Davis bought 2, and Jim Good bought 2, and so we put ours together, and the ones that Don bought actually were sold and left the airport.
Okay, so let's talk about the museum and the creation of it. So is there anything in there that sort of stands out to you as your favorite area or a favorite item that you see in the museum?
For me, it's the pictures with Jim in them, and because those just evoke the memories of Jim. All of the other things are interesting in their own right, but it's the things that remind me of Jim that are the most important for me.